What is up, diehards? Welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast on Mondays, the best day of the week. I'm your boy Clint, and yes, that is one sexy new sound you're listening. I got a new mic. I got the best mother-in-law in the world. She bought this bad boy for me. How cool is that? Give me a mic test here. 1, 2. How we sounding today? From the test runs I did a little earlier today, sounded pretty damn nice to me. So I hope all of you are enjoying the recent upgrades. You got a video upgrade, you got an audio upgrade. What more could you ask for? How's everybody doing? We've already got Mr. Gills in the chat 111 minutes early. That's dedication. That's some dedication for you. Grateful Dude and Mystic Sosa, a couple of the OGs already piling in here. Sean D, Uncle Weezy, Jonathan Ingram. We've got Doughboy Nasty. How's it going? Jim Blot 5000, UFC Shell, FTO Combat, Mike Harvey, Bananas and Grapes, Owen Carroll. And we got Nick Sisson jumping in here already. Let's get it. We are talking UFC 271. That's right. Big pay-per-view card coming up this weekend, and this is a good one, a damn good pay-per-view card for us to break down and talk about. I am super excited, and we are coming off a good night. I got to go ahead and pat myself on the back here just a little bit. We went plus 4.2 units last week. I know I talked myself into that shot on Sam Alvey. Everybody berated me for it. We still managed to come out on top in the profit, and it was pretty funny to me because I was getting comments all week. The comments in the chat, the tweets were coming at me, people being like, Clint, now you're just chasing, bro. You're crazy. You're taking all these underdogs 3 weeks in a row. You're getting desperate. Nah, son, I take value where I see it. It didn't pan out the couple of weeks before, but you got to stay true to the course. If any of you out there have watched the most recent hottest Disney movie in the world, that's what that quote was from the beginning here. The ship don't swerve because it heard how big the iceberg is. We got to stay the course. Let's go. So I am super pumped up, flying high, ready to talk UFC Vegas 271. And I'm bringing back one of the OGest of OG guests. That's right. My guy from US Integrity, Matt Holt. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Clint, what's going on, my man? Great card this week, top to bottom. You know, there have been some top-heavy cards lately. We finally got a really good card. I thought the matchmaking was great. The fights are great. I'm pumped up for this one.
I am beyond pumped up for this one, Matt. I'm right there with you. This is a great card. And I put out a post a while back about this card being stacked. And there were some people that were like, well, it's good, but it's not stacked. And I'm like, bro, you don't understand the definition of stacked then, because we have hot Dana White Contender Series talent that we want to test out. We've got veterans of the game. We have some legitimate title contenders. We've got a title fight on the line, a rematch. Like, this card has all of it. It's got everything you could possibly want. I don't know what else you can call stacked if not a card like this.
I completely agree. I think this card is stacked, and I think every fight makes sense, and I think every fight has ramifications for the winner. Like, the winner is going to move up or advance here, or in the case of, Cannonier, get the next title shot, right? Every fight has ramifications. Every fight is matched well. I'm excited. I think this is a really good card. I like some underdogs in this card. I'm pumped up. Lately,
I love hearing that.
I've been so busy. I've been missing some of these early prelims lately, and I used to not do that. This is one of those cards I will not miss 1 second of one of the fights.
I can't blame you. This card, it's going to be entertaining nonstop, violence from start to finish with the way they match these things up. And you hit the nail on the head with the matchmaking. That's really, I think, the strong suit of this card. We're going to see some super fun fights. Shout out real quick here to my guy Tajik Bey with not one, not two, not three, but four $4.99 donos all ready to get this show started. Thank you so much for always supporting us, Tajik. Hey, we got 54 and a fifth. And a fifth just rolled in. Thank you, Tajik Bey. We have got a awesome show to put on for you guys. We've already got 54, make that 56 live viewers here with us on a Monday. Let's get the crew in here. Everybody hit that retweet button, smash that like button for me. Let's fill this bad boy up. And we're going to go ahead and break down UFC 271 for you from a betting perspective, top to bottom. Let's start at the top. First fight of the night, Israel Adesanya taking on Robert the Reaper Whittaker. Rematch. We knew it was coming. We knew it had to happen. It was years in the making, and now we finally get the opportunity. Matt, this one is super intriguing to me. Izzy is going to have that 7-inch reach advantage. And in the first fight, this thing closed basically a pick'em. And now we've got Israel Adesanya as a massive minus 280, minus 300 favorite. The comeback on Robert Whittaker, you can get anywhere from plus 225 to plus 240 on him. And it just shows, like, you know, what a difference a year makes, because this fight was thought to be very even the last time that they were matched up. And now Izzy's this massive, massive favorite. I know he's dominated the division. I know he's taken care of all the contenders, but really so has Rob. And Rob took the slow way back to the title. I mean, he took a break from the sport. He stepped away for a while, took some time, came back, could have had the title shot, probably 1 or 2 wins after getting, you know, his belt taken away from him, but instead continued to take on some different tests, some different fights, and really kind of recentered himself and took the title fight when he felt he was ready for it. So props to Rob for being the challenger and really setting his own timeline for getting here. We've broken this fight down before. You know, Israel Adesanya's got that reach. He's got that slick striking. We've seen him have a little bit of trouble in the grappling. You know, a couple opponents have been able to take advantage of that, but Jan was really the only one that was able to kill him with it. We saw the level up from the Jan fight to the Marvin Vettori fight. He had a lot less trouble with Vettori than he did someone like Jan. I think that weight class difference really factored into that grappling disadvantage. And then Rob, he's classic Rob, except lately he's been really rounding out his game, Matt. We've seen him mix in those takedowns a lot. His wrestling has become a part of what he does every single fight, instead of just going out there and blitzing at his opponents, using that classic Reaper 1-2 head kick combo. He still does that, but that's not his only offense anymore. He seems to have rounded himself out. What do you feel about the main event here on UFC 271? Do you feel like this line is a little bit disrespectful to the former champ, or is it about right where it should have been all along?
I think it's not too far off. I can understand why Izzy. I thought this line should have been around 220 Izzy. So I don't think it's too far off. I think it's a little disrespectful to Rob. I do think that on his way back, he has been doing everything, on, to your point, on his own timeline to prepare for this moment. What I always think we have to think about when we're going to bet underdogs of plus 200 or more is, how do they win the fight? That's what you have to start with. Well, how are they going to be able to win the fight? And I agree that I actually think he's got to start mixing in the takedowns here. And in doing so, he's going to leave himself vulnerable for some strikes. And I actually thought that maybe the under on this fight might be something to look at. So the first fight ended with a second round knockout. And what was interesting about the first fight is, not only did Rob barely survive at the end of the first, but if you remember at the very beginning of the second, he landed a big right hand that spun Izzy all around. And I mean, they were going after it. Yet the total on this fight is 4.5 over minus 30. So under 4.5 rounds, we're getting plus money. And it feels like Whittaker's going to have to do something different. He can't stand there and, at range and strike with Izzy. Izzy will completely pick him apart. So he's going to have to be aggressive to win in one of two areas. Aggressive in hunting for takedowns, which makes him vulnerable, or aggressive trying to land that big power shot like he almost landed at the beginning of round 2 of their first fight. And anytime one fighter has to get over aggressive in order to be able to win the fight, that tends to lead to more knockouts, getting caught in more submissions. And thus, the only play that I've made so far on this main event is under 4.5 rounds plus 120.
Okay. All right. You know what? With the type of firepower these guys bring to the table, I don't hate it. I definitely can see one or both of these guys finishing the fight. I also got to wonder how this fight is really going to unfold. I almost feel like there's going to be a bit more of a feeling out process early on. Rob came out last time and really blitzed forward super early, came in almost angry, unnatural for Rob Whittaker. Izzy, I think, really got under his skin. A lot of people had kind of proclaimed him the champ early, and that seemed to have gotten to Rob. So if he comes out a lot more measured in this fight, we've seen a couple times where Israel Adesanya has felt just fine to sit back and play with his food, wait for his opponent to come to him, and then look for some counters. And then if you mix in the grappling on top of that, once they do finally start to tussle up, yeah, I can see this fight being slow for a round or two before it really starts to pick up. So I actually think that 4.5 mark is almost sharp on the total where they set it, because this thing could be a third or a fourth round type of finish rather than a first or a second. But it all comes down to that game plan. You know, if Izzy flips the script and comes out fast, then we know it's never slowing down, because Rob's going to have to do something to keep up. This is a very interesting fight, in my opinion, Matt. And again, just one more massive shout out to Tajik, because the whole time we've been talking, he keeps on ramming that donation button. So thank you, Tajik. We do appreciate it. I lean with Israel Adesanya. I'm one of these guys, Matt, where if I'm having success with a fighter, if I'm on a guy and his streak just continues to chug along, you keep making money, you keep winning. You know, that blip on the radar against Jan, I feel like it almost doesn't count. It was a different weight class. I'm not going to line up to go against Israel Adesanya here, but I'm also not blind where I do think this line is a little bit wide. I think that Robert is probably going to come in with a much better game plan, and this really is the fight that we should have gotten the first time around.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But what I wonder is, and I've heard from several really sharp MMA people that they expect Whittaker to come in much more level-headed, even keel, and to have that feeling out process. But my problem with that is, if the fight plays out like that, how does Whittaker win? Because inevitably, I think he's going to get picked off on the feet here. I think he's got to surge forward and land power shots, because if it turns into a stand-up kickboxing match, he's going to lose. At the end of the day, he either has to hit him with a big shot or get the takedown offense going early. And I think with the reach disadvantage, that means because Izzy's not going to be aggressive, he's going to also have to aggressively pursue those takedowns one way or another. I think that could spell trouble, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And maybe he's happy to just say, hey, I'm not, because I rushed in and got knocked out, and not just knocked out in the second, he was hurt in the first. I mean, he almost got finished at the end of the first as well. So you almost get finished the end of the first. You get knocked out in the second. Hey, being aggressive didn't work. Let me try something different. But I don't see him winning that fight. I think Izzy then just cruises to a really boring decision. What's amazing about Israel Adesanya is it felt like a couple of years ago it's weird to see a fighter that still never lost at welterweight that's actually feels like his peak stardom passed. Like Kamaru Usman was unbeatable forever, but it's just in the last couple of fights that people are starting to treat Kamaru Usman as a superstar. Izzy felt like a superstar a couple of years ago,
Like
and
out the
then had
gate.
a couple of fights where he just went through the motion. He lost to Jan. He came back and dominated Vettori in less than spectacular fashion. And now suddenly the fans don't like him. They've turned on him. He's the heel in all of his fights. And he's not a heel that he's not the Conor McGregor heel where you want to go in there and boo Izzy and see him get knocked out. It's really a strange situation. What's happened to Israel Adesanya?
That's a very valid point, because I mean, you mentioned Usman, like everybody's on the bandwagon now. All the haters are starting to notice, and Izzy just keeps on doing what he does. And really, I think his hype was almost at its peak when he beat Robert Whittaker the first time. You know, nobody's
100%.
really been as high on him since. So that's it's an interesting angle and a view to take it. I also think that Whittaker is one of those. He's just one of the most likable guys in MMA. You know what I mean? He's super nice. He's super easygoing, super nice to listen to. So it does create that good guy, bad guy type of dynamic. I think I'm still going to side with Israel Adesanya winning this fight, Matt, but honestly, I don't have a bet. It's funny that you picked the under, because if I was going to make a bet on the main event, I think I would take the over because of kind of what we talked about. I do think that the way that Rob has been fighting recently has been risk adverse. It's almost like he got that knockout from Izzy and doesn't want to have that happen again.
Yeah, 5 straight wins by decision. So you're right. I mean, that's how he wins now.
Before Izzy ran into Whittaker, he was a bit of a decisionator himself. You know what I mean? He kind of got that finishing moniker from what happened with Rob. I just think we've seen a couple times now where Israel Adesanya is fine to sit back and be patient and play that slow, boring game unless someone really brings the fight to him. And even against Vettori, now I know Vettori is made out of steel. You know, what does it take to finish that guy? We still don't know. But he was fine to do the Israel Adesanya head movement. He was fine to duck around and play, you know, and show off just how, you know, how much more technical, how better he was in that spot. And I almost feel like this is that tale of two fights type of situation where, you know, we had, if you want to use like Moreno and Figueiredo for an example, that first fight, they went toe-to-toe for 5 straight rounds. And then there were some circumstances, obviously, but Brendan Moreno put Figueiredo down and put him down in a hurry in the rematch. Completely different types of fights. I almost feel like that might be what we have here, where Izzy says, I knocked you out last time. This time I'm going to school you for 25 minutes and win unanimously both ways. You know what I mean?
I do think that there is a little motivation on Israel Adesanya's side to become a superstar and start to get paid like it. And he's not right now. He's just not that guy. He doesn't resonate with fans. And we talked about the Whittaker first fight being his sort of springboard, but since then he hasn't got all the hype that he should have gotten. I think he wants to make a statement because the problem is there are no other big paydays in this division. So he has got to make a statement here, turn himself into a superstar, because I'm not sure you can do it against Derrick Brunson or Jared Cannonier. There just won't be enough eyeballs on you. This is your chance with probably maybe the most eyeballs you might have in a couple of years to come out and remind everybody that you are one of the most amazing fighters in all of mixed martial arts. I think if he has a little more motivation to be exciting, because he hasn't been lately, and the numbers show it out in the pay-per-views, and Whittaker has to be a little aggressive to win this fight, maybe we get a stoppage. I don't know. I had to take a flyer somewhere in the main event, so I went under.
I hear you. All right. Well, we got a little bit of a disagreement here to kick the night off. Matt Holt already bet the under. I am leaning towards the over. I think we're both picking Israel Adesanya to win the fight, but neither of us are touching that money line at this point. Hey, we've got 100 live viewers tuning in at this point. UFC 271. Thank you very much for hanging out here on Pub Sports Radio. Hit that like button for us, and make sure you give my guy Matt Holt a follow. He is the president of U.S. Integrity, spending some time with us here on the show. We always appreciate your time, Matt. Next fight up, the co-main event here. We've got Derrick Lewis, the Black Beast, making a quick turnaround, taking on Tai Tuivasa in a really, really fun co-main event. I mean, everybody was so ready to bury Derrick Lewis his last fight. Everyone was so hyped up on Dawkins that they were ready to just sell poor Derrick Lewis down the river, and he wins by thunderous first round KO, makes a quick turnaround. Now here he is dealing with another young up-and-comer, and I'm seeing some love out there for Tai Tuivasa. This is a crazy situation to me where for me, Matt, I'm kind of buying in on this new attitude Derrick Lewis. You know, since he really started taking this thing seriously, he's not just out there for a good time anymore. He's talking about hurting people. He got the UFC record for having the most knockouts in UFC history. He's talking about a rematch with Francis Ngannou. He wants a piece, you know, of some of those big boys like Ngannou and Cyril Gane. He talked about thinking that fight would go very differently if they had a rematch. So I think he's changed some things, and we can see that in his last couple fights. He's going to have a 4-inch reach advantage here, and then everybody knows Tai Tuivasa. He's fast, he's athletic, he loves those big, hard, hammering leg kicks, and that's kind of the one thing that I'm really concerned about here in this spot, because Derrick Lewis fights really all look the same. You know, once an opponent decides to start trading, they go to sleep. Unless you can matador Derrick Lewis for a full 15 minutes, you're not beating this guy, because eventually you're going to have to stand in the pocket. And that's all Tai Tuivasa does, is step into the pocket and want to throw down and swing with people. That's a bad game plan for this fight. But you look at that Greg Hardy fight, and he made Greg Hardy basically panic after about 4 good leg kicks. That's maybe the one path to victory that Tai Tuivasa has here, is to chop down the tree of Derrick Lewis. But I gotta tell you, Matt, I had a guy on reach out to me basically, and I quote, he told me that Derrick Lewis hits harder during Black History Month. So I kind of have a feeling that Derrick Lewis is not going to be losing this fight. He's a minus 180 favorite right now. You can get Tai Tuivasa about plus 150, plus 155. How do you see the co-main event playing out?
Yeah, I'm with you a little bit in that I like Derrick Lewis here, but let's not forget that Tai Tuivasa, much like Derrick Lewis, was sort of an afterthought a couple years ago. He had a 3-fight losing streak. At the end of the day, what was it? Junior Dos Santos, Blagoy and then Sergey Spivak. And everyone thought, oh, Tuivasa's done. This guy doesn't have any real career. And here he is, 4 straight wins later, all by knockout, 3 of those first-round knockouts. I do think this is a deserved shot. I don't think this is one of those situations where, hey, we couldn't find a guy for Derrick Lewis. Let's just bring this guy up. When you win 4 straight fights in the UFC, all by knockout in the first or second round, you deserve to be here in this situation. So while I believe that Tai Tuivasa should be in this fight in a co-main event on a pay-per-view, I also think this is a terrible matchup for him. And he's, we're gonna see that chin, how that chin can hold up here, because Derrick Lewis is certainly going to test it. And if you look at the total on this fight, 1.5 rounds under minus 160, nobody expects this thing to get out of the first round. And I have to imagine if this is a first-round knockout, that certainly heavily favors Derrick Lewis. But we have to remember that Derrick Lewis has been knocked out a couple of times himself. I mean, he's been finished in each of his last 6 losses. So I think Tuivasa might be a little liver to get a KO win than people think. But I think minus 170 is actually a little bit of a discount on Derrick Lewis. I think if you start breaking this matchup down, that Lewis probably wins this matchup like 68 to 72% of the time, which means this matchup should probably be somewhere between minus 200 and minus 260, yet you're only laying minus 170, as low as that at some places. So I think the value here is probably on the Black Beast.
I do tend to agree with you there, Matt. And really, when you talk about that total, this is one of those spots, Francis Ngannou in his last fight, everyone was saying Francis, KO, why would you ever play the money line? You weren't getting that much extra on the Francis, the Francis KO line. But this is the kind of spot where you go, well, you can get Lewis by knockout at even money versus laying minus 180. That's a pretty significant discount to get that KO prop. And does Derrick really win any other way? Because the longer this fight goes, I think the more Tai Tuivasa would work his way into it. You know what I mean? I don't see Derrick Lewis winning a decision in this spot. Tai is smaller. He's faster. He's got those leg kicks. If anybody's going to point fight, Tai Tuivasa is going to be the point fighter.
Yeah, Ty's definitely going to throw more volume for sure. I don't think anyone believes that Derrick Lewis is going to out-volume Tai Tuivasa. He actually throws a lot, especially if they get clinched up, which big heavyweights tend to. He's good in the clinch. He'll dirty box, throw a lot, throws a lot of knees. I could see a situation if this thing actually went to the judges' scorecards where Tuivasa outlands Derrick Lewis like 2-1 or 2.5-1. But at the end of the day, I just don't believe with the styles of these fighters, and they're, both of them are happy to sit in the pocket if the other fighter is willing, that they're going to mix it up quick. I'm just interested to see Tuivasa's chin, because I think he's going to get hit in the pocket a couple times. And if he takes those shots and then this fight gets real interesting really quick, to your point, because of the leg kicks. And Derrick Lewis's chin isn't great. People think of this huge guy. Yes, he has amazing knockout power, but
got a little bit of internet technical difficulties going on. My man Matt froze mid-thought there. Oh, we got you back there, Matt.
Oh, sorry.
That's all
anyway,
good.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just saying, look, I think these two are going to mix it up at the end of the day. And if it does go to a decision, it's probably Tai Tuivasa outlanding by margin.
I think you're right. And I do think, I've made the argument for the over in some Derrick Lewis fights in the past because he can kind of get into that lull you to sleep type of fight. He can definitely slow the pace down, drag it late, wait for you to get tired, wait for you to drop your hands a little bit. He's done that. He's got a lot of third round KOs on his record, but this particular opponent, Tai Tuivasa, is not the slow type. When was the last time you saw Tai Tuivasa take it easy? I mean, even in his last fight, I did take that over 1.5 shot, thinking that he was going to be able to kind of get this thing strung out and deep. And I actually thought he was going to lose a decision in his last fight, but he turned that thing around real quick at the beginning of the second round and robbed everybody the under 1.5. So I do think that this is going to be a quick start fight. And similarly to his last fight, if he doesn't get an early first round stoppage one way or the other, they probably go right back at it early in round 2. And then we have seen, and I'm flying solo here for a second. We'll get Matt back in here. He's having some sound issues. Sorry there, everybody. One thing, there he is. One thing that we have seen is in his last fight, Tai Tuivasa, again, I'm going to go to that Greg Hardy fight. He did the stanky leg. He gave Kevin Lee a run for his money on that chicken dance that he did after he got clipped badly. So I think we're going to get early start. I think we're going to get started early here in this co-main event. I think these guys are going to throw down almost like Tai Tuivasa always does. And it's going to probably be a 1-round fight.
I agree. I didn't bet it. I don't know that I'm going to bet this fight because I like the favorite. I don't really like, laying that kind of money with, that price with Derrick Lewis. I didn't bet it. And the over is indicative of the fight that we all expect to see, 1.5 rounds under -160. So I think it's priced right. And, maybe there's a little value enough to make a play on Derrick Lewis, but I didn't. I like your play actually a little bit, maybe enough that I'll take a shot on it. Derrick Lewis at even money to win by KO. That's probably the only play that I've been enticed by so far.
I kind of think that's the best, value on the board here for this one. I don't think Ty is technical enough to really work himself to a 15-minute decision. So kind of play either guy by knockout is really the way that I would address this one. I know that was a real long-winded way to say the easiest pick on the co-main event, folks. So hope you enjoyed hanging with us for that. We're going to move this bad boy right along. Next fight up, Jared Cannonier taking on Derrick Brunson. Another fight that's got significant implications. Jared Cannonier, a guy that he's really looking for that title shot. Derrick Brunson, a guy that's been left for dead and has worked himself back into the contenders circle. He's got an opportunity to finally get that title shot here in this spot. This is such a crazy fight for me, Matt, because I could not have been more wrong recently on Derrick Brunson. He's that guy for me. Like, I just keep on not believing. Like, I know he's got the skill set. I know he can wrestle. I know he can strike. But those chin concerns, the way he gets rocked and wobbled in every single fight, and he's got all those knockout losses on his record, I just know those chin issues are going to rear their ugly head one of these days. And I've predicted it his last 3 fights or so in a row, and he keeps on making it work. But he really relies on that grappling. He really relies on that takedown. And I don't think Jared Cannonier's crystals are going to let him get taken down. This guy is a heavyweight walking around in a 185er's body. He's so physically strong. I kind of feel like, and again, I've said this 3 times in a row, so anybody who wants to bet Derrick Brunson, don't pay attention to me. But I think that Brunson is going to get clipped, and when he panic wrestles, Jared Cannonier is going to be the guy he can't take down. I think Jared Cannonier is going to be the guy that can fish for the underhooks and keep it standing. And then he'll put Brunson down for good. I see Jared Cannonier winning this thing by thunderous knockout. Matt, how do you feel about this one?
So when I look at the pure matchup, and if we just look at their recent run, especially Cannonier against Kevin Gastelum and how crisp his striking looked there, I want to fall on your side. But at the end of the day, when I start to break down the fight on paper, some of Jared Cannonier's wins haven't aged well at all. So now I look back, and is Jack Hermanson really an impressive win anymore? Anderson Silva at the end of his career? David Branch, who at the time when Cannonier beat him, it was a big upset. We all thought David Branch back then. That's right. David Branch was going.
You remember those days?
Yes. Was actually going to compete for a title somehow. But none of those wins have aged very well. I mean, his losses at 205 to to Jan and Dominic Reyes and Glover, fine. He's a different fighter at middleweight, 4-1 at middleweight. It's just that his wins at middleweight, who he just named, Anderson and David Branch, they're a little bit misleading. None of those wins have aged well, except maybe the Gastelum win. But even, look, does anyone really think Gastelum's been great at middleweight? He has not looked good lately at middleweight. So at the end of the day, I'm a little bit nervous that we're all overvaluing Jared Cannonier a little bit here. I will say this. If this line gets to Cannonier minus 200, I am going to bet Derrick Brunson plus 170.
Okay. Hey,
I think his wrestling, I think that, look, Gastelum didn't try to wrestle Cannonier right away until he got hit with that monster shot. Then he tried to wrestle a little bit. I think at the end of the day, we're going to see. I mean, Anderson Silva doesn't wrestle. David Branch didn't try to wrestle. I don't know that anyone at middleweight has ever tried to even wrestle him. We all thought that everyone was going to blast out Derrick Brunson, and yet nobody does lately. I think these are both destiny fights. A couple. Look at Derek Holland. I mean, Kevin Holland, almost knocked him out too. But yeah, I get it. It's one of those things where nobody can comfortably say, I think Derek Brunson will win. But if you've been betting against Derek Brunson, you're broke. And I might put I'm just saying, if it gets to minus 200 on the other side, I'm actually going to be on Brunson.
Okay.
And I know that's going to be very unpopular here.
I've been seeing a lot of love on the internet for Brunson, actually. Right here, Effie Any Action is saying Brunson's her, favorite dog. And I say, I'm sorry, I apologize. I say her going based off the Effie, but it might not be a her. So Effie's saying Brunson is the favorite dog. And I see several other people online picking Brunson, people I respect in this game. Shout out to my guy, Justin from UFC Bro.
Let me ask you this, Clint. Aren't you more impressed with Brunson's recent wins on paper than you are with the 4 wins at middleweight Cannonier has? At least that's a fair statement.
So for me, that is a bit of a question mark, actually, because let's look back at those wins. We've got Ian Heinisch, which no one saw that coming. I think I bet Ian Heinisch that night. Ian Heinisch has since kind of faltered a little bit. We're not sure really where he stands, so you can kind of poke a hole in that one. Edmund Shabazian, that kid gasses out in every single fight, and he went from being the undefeated Superboy to now we're not sure if he's ever even going to be a contender type. So it looked great the night that Brunson snapped the kid's undefeated winning streak, but it has not aged well. Kevin Holland, which I have all the love and respect in the world for Kevin Holland, but that was before he took his grappling seriously. He got laid on the whole fight and was the fresher fighter in the 5th round and almost got Brunson out of there late in the fight because Brunson just ran out of gas and Kevin Holland was still good to go. He's also a natural 170 pounder who's just kind of masquerading at 185. That one's another one I can poke a hole in. And then Darren Till. I'm the biggest Darren Till hater on the planet, Matt. Let me tell you, I have taken every opportunity in the world to fade Darren Till, except the fight against Brunson. That was the one time I have put my money on Darren Till, was the fight against Brunson. And he had him on skates. It wasn't until, again, that 3rd round, he gassed out. He couldn't hang with the grappling. That was the difference maker for me. So I don't rate the Darren Till win very highly at all. And then we flip over to Jared Cannonier. You've got the Anderson Silva TKO leg kick injury. It's a 40-year-old man that he leg kicked to death. Well, that's not ever something you can take away. Again, you can kind of poke a hole in it. Now, beating Jack Hermanson via ground and pound in round 2, that one speaks to me. This is a man who is constantly coming through as an underdog, fighting near the top of the division. He just went 5 full rounds with, another potential contender. Very tough guy, hard to finish. That win stands out to me. Now, Whittaker absolutely schooled Jared Cannonier. So that's a loss that, you can say looks bad, but it's the number 2 guy in the division, the former champion that outclassed him there. So a loss, but not that bad. And then the win over Kelvin Gastelum. We all think Kelvin Gastelum's maybe a little undersized for 185, but you can't deny the fact that he's a contender. I do actually think that Cannonier has the slightly better resume in the last 4 fights when you compare them.
Well, maybe if you just say, how did he look in those wins? Because you're right. Brunson looked on the verge of defeat in a couple of those wins. Although I think it's a little unfair because it's sort of a myopic view to say, well, he almost got knocked out late in the fifth round versus Kevin Holland. Yeah, but he dominated every second of the first 4 rounds because he just laid on top of him, and Kevin Holland couldn't stop the wrestling. So we'll see. I just, a Cannonier for me, I just don't know. We haven't seen him in there against a lot of different styles or guys that try to wrestle him, or a lot of southpaws that are going to try to wrestle power. Because Derrick Brunson's 2 things: wrestle, big left hand. There's nothing else to his game. Exactly. Wrestle you, big left hand, and hope his chin doesn't get tagged. But I'm just, there's something about Jared Cannonier. I think people have fallen in love with him a little bit with his story and speaking out of the fighter pay. And, we used to fight at heavyweight. Oh, by the way, he was 0-3 at 205. I mean, this guy wasn't a killer on the way down. He came down to 205, lost every fight he fought. I mean, against killers, granted. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like he's a little overvalued. And by the way, he's almost 40.
Yes.
This isn't a young guy coming down. I mean, Jared Cannonier is almost 40 years old now. How much longer does he have to compete at this high of a level? We'll see.
This is a fight that I have yet to bet on, Matt. I don't know that I'm going to, because like I said, I get every single Brunson fight wrong. I'm going to pick Cannonier to win this fight. Again, I think that his durability is something that's never been called into question. It's impossible to finish this guy at 185. It took 205ers and heavyweights to give that a whirl. So I don't think he's going to get KO'd in this spot. And somebody in the comments, I want to go ahead and shout him out. They did say, don't overvalue the wrestling of Jared Cannonier in this spot. And I 100% agree. I am not saying that he's a phenomenal wrestler. What I am saying is he's physically strong enough to defend the takedown. I don't think he's a phenomenal grappler or a good wrestler. But if he ever gets Brunson panic wrestling, if he gets Brunson wobbled and shooting in for a takedown, this is the guy I think that doesn't work on. This is the guy who I think has strong enough hips to keep it standing and keep it up in this realm. So, I'm going to pick Cannonier, but I just can't get Brunson right. So, if you're betting Brunson, you've almost got a guaranteed lock, because I went the other way on this one. All right, moving along. Next fight up, a banger. Kyler the Matrix Phillips makes his UFC return here, and so does Marcelo Rojo, a guy who I am so disappointed that we haven't seen more of, Matt. I will not forgive COVID for what they've done to poor Marcelo Rojo. This guy comes into the UFC on short notice, takes on one of, everybody's new favorite guy, Charles Air Jourdain. And this is the crazy T-Rex dude that everyone wants to see run around the octagon doing, this thing when he wins. And he has 3 fights in a row that are booked against appropriate level competition. And all 3 of his opponents have pulled out on him. So Marcelo Rojo has been trying to get his second UFC fight for God knows how long. And I had already locked in a bet, I believe, in 2 of those fights on Marcelo Rojo, and he never made it to the cage. Now he draws Kyler Phillips, a much, much stiffer test here. 9-2, the Matrix, trains out of the MMA lab. This guy maybe got robbed of a draw that he should have had against Paiva that first round.
How was it not a 10-8 in that first round?
You don't think that was a 10-8?
No, I do. I said, how was it not? He dropped him twice, and the ref could have stopped it on multiple occasions.
I have no clue. No clue how that wasn't a 10-8, because, even on paper, that's a damn 10-8. He did everything. He nearly had the guy killed. They had to pick him up between rounds. Like, when the round ended, Kyler was exhausted, but he got up. And his opponent, Paiva, he just sat there. Like, he didn't want to move for a minute after the bell rang. So, no clue how he didn't get at least the draw there, but it did point out some flaws, right? We've seen that Kyler Phillips has sometimes the tendency to go too hard in that first round. He goes for that kill, and more often than not, he gets it. But when he doesn't get that kill, he's not the same man that he was early in the fight. So if you can survive round 1, if you can drag this guy deep, things get super sketchy here. Kyler Phillips is going to have a 1-inch reach advantage. He is a BJJ black belt. And the thing we've really noticed with Marcelo Rojo is he's a killer be killed type of fighter. This guy comes forward the whole time. He roasts your ribs with 2 and 4 punch combos. He just lets loose. I love the way he beats up and attacks the legs and the body, banking that damage for down the road against a lesser opponent. I mean, I loved a couple of spots on Marcelo Rojo. Like I said, I locked bets in on him multiple times leading up to this, and I'm tempted here because he's a 3-1 underdog. You've got Kyler Phillips minus 400 across the board at this point, plus 270 to plus 300 on Marcelo Rojo. And man, the big concern for me, Matt, is that 4 out of 7 of Rojo's losses have come by way of submission. He's an absolute killer. 8 KO wins, 6 subs, just 1 win by decision. But when it hits the mat, that's when he really seems to have problems. And that's where a guy training out of the MMA lab, even though he doesn't always use his grappling as his main source of offense, he likes to strike, he likes the spin and shit, but we can't forget how good Kyler Phillips is on the mat. I'm worried we've got like a sneaky club and sub type situation, or even if he comes into this fight a little more level-headed because of the way that last fight went, because of losing it after gassing in round 1, if he comes out with more of a grappling heavy offense, I think his grappling slices through Rojo like a knife through butter, Matt. How do you see this fight playing out?
I love the under in this fight, and I haven't bet it yet for one reason. One of the things I've been looking at lately in UFC is, and I don't blame Phillips for that gassing out in that first round against Paiva, because what I thought happened in that first round is we see some of these fights sometimes where you get one of those refs that lets him go. There's a couple of referees in the UFC that would have stopped that fight multiple times. Multiple times in that first round, that fight would have been stopped. But anytime a fighter has a guy that much in trouble, they're going to go for it in almost every case. And you're going to get gassed when you actually don't end up getting a KO there. So I'm actually interested to see who the ref is, because the one thing I know about Kyler Phillips is he almost always hurts his opponents in round 1. And he almost always goes for it. And the Paiva fight was no different. He absolutely destroyed Paiva in round 1. And I think he went extra hard in round 1 because it looked like the ref was about to jump in on multiple occasions. So I'm interested to see who the ref is. And I don't think the odds are going to change that much between now and fight night on the under. But you'll see the ref in the ring well before either of them walks to the octagon, know who it is, and then assuming that it's not one of 2 officials, I'll be betting the under on
if
the
it's
fight.
Chris Cannonier, don't be touching that button.
Because I don't see how this fight doesn't end up with a finish just because stylistically, but I do think if it's one of 2 officials, Kyler Phillips could get gassed and then the fight could take a different dynamic. Other than that, I think this thing ends within the first 7.5 minutes of octagon time.
I like that look, Matt. I really do, because I agree with you here. The way that Rojo fights, I have yet to see him have a high fight IQ fight. He just goes to war. That's all he knows. And I don't think he's suddenly going to change that because he's fighting a dangerous opponent. I think this is one of those fights that as soon as one person cranks it up, the other one will oblige, and it just never is going to slow down from that point. And I don't know that these are the guys that have the steel chins where it just drags on. You know what I mean? Where if they just keep taking big shot after big shot, they keep coming. I think these guys have enough high power offense that one of them eventually is going to fall. So maybe we got a good opportunity for a look on violence here. And I'm kind of leaning to Kyler Phillips by submission. I want to see when the props come out what that sub number looks like, because we know that Rojo is a guy that won't quit. With the 4 losses by sub, I think that's the biggest advantage on the board in this fight, is that grappling, that offensive BJJ. So I think that the sub prop is going to be an interesting spot to maybe take a poke at, but just take the under, have both guys involved.
Yeah, and in that arm triangle loss to John Castaneda, Rojo didn't even look like he knew how to defend it almost. I just think, I'll be honest with you, I don't think Rojo has much of a shot here. I think Kyler Phillips has a lot of ways to finish this fight, but I think the one shot he has is to catch him, hurt him, and maybe finish him. So I think either way, the under, if you're laying minus 125 in that range, there's a pretty good chance this one is not going 2.5 rounds.
I don't mind that look whatsoever, Matt. I completely agree. And I think I'm siding with you here that we're both going to go ahead and say that we expect Kyler Phillips to go ahead and get the win here. It's unfortunate because Rojo's the kind of guy that I want to cheer for. Rojo's the guy that I want to back and bet on at a big underdog price. But this ain't it for me. I don't think this is the spot where I can line up behind him.
I'm with you.
All right. Real quick here, what we're going to do is take a short break and hear from our sponsors. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast here at Pub Sports Radio. I am joined by the president of U.S. Integrity, Matt Holt himself, talking UFC 271. And our next fight up is going to be maybe my sleeper fight of the night here. Nasrat Haqparast taking on Bobby Green. There's some big, exciting names, some big popular fighters on this card, Matt, but I think this one is pure fireworks. The way these two guys fight, I fully expect a slugfest for a full 15-minute start to finish. You got Bobby Green, and let's be real, he's the reason I've got trust issues. Bobby Green is a world-class talent. His hands are incredible. His pace and his volume are second to none. He's durable as all hell. You can't finish this guy. And he just comes out and puts a pace on people and absolutely breaks them over the course of a 15-minute fight. He's this close to finishing every single opponent in the third round, but can never quite get it done. Now, of course, the one time I don't take the value bet on Green by knockout, he comes out and smokes poor Ally Aquinta in the very first round in his last fight. So everybody's riding a little high on my guy, Bobby Green. Nasrat, coming off the loss to Hooker, where he kind of got walked around the octagon, showed his durability off in that fight. He's kind of similar to a short version of Bobby Green. He's got the same fast, strong hands, good, accurate punches, good, solid footwork. He's durable as well. Nasrat's going to have the 1-inch reach advantage here in this spot. And I don't normally do this, Matt, but this is the type of fight where I feel like you really have to look at the numbers. So Nasrat averages 5.19 significant strikes per minute with a 46% striking accuracy. Now, shout out to Uncle Wheezy for these numbers. I know he's hanging out here tonight. Nasrat Haqparast has a 71.66 striking defense. That's insane. That is a gigantic number for striking defense. You go over to Bobby Green. He's got a 5.51 strikes landed per minute, significant strikes landed per minute at a 51% accuracy. So he's about 5% more accurate. He has a little bit more pace, but he's got 62.25% striking defense. So he's more willing to get in there and trade, which makes sense. That volume is higher. The defense is slightly lower. Those numbers almost kind of level out here just a little bit. This is going to be a very, very evenly matched fight, in my opinion. And we've got a nice tight line on it, Matt. We've got minus 140, it looks like, for Bobby Green, plus 120 for Nasrat Haqparast. What do you make of this fight?
So, I mean, obviously I like the over, but I don't think it's bettable at, minus 200, minus 210. So I'm with you. I think it's a dead coin flip. And if you get plus 130 in a coin flip, then I could see the case for betting Haqparast. I think this one's so dead even. Both of these guys tend to lose when they fight the most elite guys. Haqparast, 2 losses are to Dan Hooker and Drew Dober when Drew Dober was red hot coming out of that Denver gym. So, okay, both of those are excusable. And he looks like one of those guys that has that German sort of a little bit stiff, good footwork, a little bit too upright fighting style, with mostly kickboxing. there's a reason he has 0 submissions in his career. I think if Bobby Green, who tends to never wrestle anymore, actually got his wrestling going here a little bit, then the line would make sense. But let's assume that the Bobby Green we've seen recently, who has been more aggressive, who was aggressive in that loss to Rafael Fiziev. In fact, he was hurting him in the third round, to your point, despite ended up losing the fight as he lost the first 2 rounds pretty clearly. Assuming that these two just stand and do what they've done lately, I think it's a dead pick 'em. And at that point, why not take the plus money? But I do think if Bobby Green was to get the wrestling going, because he used to wrestle once upon a time, I think some people forget he made his UFC debut way back in 2013. Bobby Green did. This could be an easier night for him, but I don't think he will. I think these two are just going to trade and do what they do, and it's probably going to go the distance, and it's probably going to be a hotly contested decision. And I think, Nasrat's going to could have some more success early. Bobby Green's likely to have some more success in round 3. It feels like what the line's telling you, a really tight fight that's more than likely going to go to the distance.
I completely agree, Matt. There's probably a lot of people out there right now surprised I haven't already bet Bobby Green. Part of that, though, is the thought process that you just laid out. Money's coming in on Nasrat Haqparast. I do like the Bobby Green side. And one thing that, that I do that maybe some other people don't is I like to take into account the mental state of these fighters. And it's sometimes, you misjudge, you get something wrong. But what we've seen from Bobby Green recently is kind of like Derrick Lewis, kind of a revitalizing of his career. He's taking it more seriously these days, Matt. You go over to his Instagram and he's posting motivational speeches. He's talking about how you got to get up and work harder than the next guy. You got to want it more than the next guy. And he's almost a Gaethje type, where before he was just having fun. And then he finally decided to get serious and said, you know what? I want gold wrapped around my waist. And he's starting to make the actual changes that you need to achieve that kind of a goal. And I think that fight with Rafael Fiziev really showed off what he was capable of. And he came out in his last fight and didn't play with a fighter that normally you'd expect him to walk around the octagon for 15 minutes. He got rid of him early because he's got that change in mindset.
Aren't you scared a little bit by that last fight that we all might overrate it a little bit? I mean, it didn't feel like Al Quinta wanted to be there. And the first time he got hit with anything, just a Bobby Green right hand, he was like, you know what? I actually don't want to get punched in the face tonight. And he basically just tapped out and got out of there.
His phone rang. He had a house to sell.
Let's pretend that didn't happen. And Bobby Green is coming off the decision loss to Fiziev, which, by the way, he looked good in. He was the guy in the third round landing the big shots, rallying the crowd, almost with the late come from behind knockout. So he still looked good in that loss, but he'd be coming off a loss and not a 45-second starching of Al Quinta who didn't want to fight. Would this be Green minus 150, or would we have this fight as a pick'em?
That's a really tough question to answer because, similar to what we were talking about on Brunson, Matt, I'm higher than most on Bobby Green. I've been the guy that's put my foot in the bear trap a couple times and laid too much chalk on Bobby Green because I see the upside, and he just kept on making those poor IQ choices and fighting close with his opponents. He's not really doing that anymore. And because of that, personally, I do think Bobby Green maybe deserves to be a minus 170 here. This is a spot, though, where the numbers tell a story of two very, very close fighters. So you're not wrong when you say the value is on the plus money with a younger Nasrat Haqparast. But I do think that Bobby Green, of the two, has performed more admirably against higher levels of competition. I really think that's all this comes down to, is when you look at the competition, who looked good versus who. And that's a bit of an eye test. That's a bit of a tough thing to really, put some weight on, because you could be seeing something a little bit wrong. You could be making an opinion, on something like that. So you might be stepping into it a little bit here. But it's like with Nasrat Haqparast, he got KO'd flat by Drew Dover a couple fights ago. I didn't see that coming. I thought that was going to be a close competitive fight, and he got flatlined. Now he beats Alex Munoz and Rafa Garcia. I like Rafa Garcia, but not sure what level he's at. Alex Munoz, is he even UFC level? We're not really sure. And then he got destroyed by Dan Hooker. Now, I don't know that Bobby Green necessarily does any better against Dan Hooker, but I do think he would probably have a bit better showing than that. And then you look, again, flip side on my guy Bobby Green here. I thought he won the Thiago Moises fight. I thought the judges got that one wrong that night. He beat up Alan Patrick. He beat up Lando Venata. And even Rafael Fiziev, it looked like he was going to stop him in the third round. That he does have those 2 L's next to his record, but I think he kind of shined in those spots a little bit. So maybe I'm wrong, but I do think that Bobby Green is probably just ever so slightly the better fighter. Is it worth it to lay minus 160, minus 175 on a guy that you think is just that much better? Maybe not. I don't know.
And the one thing I think that we would all agree on is if one fighter is more likely than the other here to have success in the wrestling game, it's Bobby Green.
Yes. Nasrat doesn't shoot takedowns, even though he's got a good, solid takedown defense. Bobby's really the only one of the two to ever mix those in. But I think this is a spot where, Matt, and again, I've been burned by myself doing this, but I think I just want to buy on Bobby Green. I want to buy on the mindset. I want to buy in on this change, this new attitude, Bobby Green 2.0. I do think that he's kind of turning a corner late in his career here, looking for more than just an exciting night on Saturday. So, I'm going to wait for this line to crash as low as it'll go. And if I can get minus 130 or something like that on Bobby Green, that's probably when I'll jump in and take it. But I'm not laying minus 150. I'm not laying minus 170. Yeah. That's a little too pricey for me. I do want to be on the Bobby Green side, but the number's got to be there for me.
I agree. I could see that. If it got down to minus 130, that would probably make sense. But right now, this is stay away from me. I just really think this is an even fight. Plus, I like young guys' ability to improve. Nothing against Bobby, but let's face it, he's in the twilight of his career at 36 years old. He's fighting a guy 10 years younger than him. And we have to assume, because Nasrat was hot a couple of years ago. Let's just pretend this guy has talent. Let's remember how hyped he was a couple of years ago. He probably has more room to improve than Bobby. If we're basing it just off their last fights, Bobby's a deserved favorite. If we're saying, where are they now? Because we don't get the advantage of seeing them training and know where they're getting better. Nasrat probably had more room to improve than Bobby did.
True. It's another good angle to consider. And I mean, just maybe one more, little sprinkle on top of the cauldron here that we say stay away, because this is a super close fight that could go either way.
Maybe you take either guy by decision too, if you like him, because this one has decision written all over it.
It really does. It really does, because outside of that KO from Bobby Green, he just never ends up finishing people. And Nasrat's been crazy durable outside of Drew Dober landing just the perfect shot on him. So,
and Drew Dober's a monster. He has a huge right hand.
Yes. He's going to put anybody down with that bad boy. So maybe just parlay the over with something. That might be the easiest way to go on this spot. Yeah. Not a bad call, Matt. All right, moving right along, folks. First off, we got 267 live viewers. Those numbers are getting back up where I like to see them. Thank you all so much for joining us here tonight. Everybody smash that like button and share this video out there. If you've got the social media to do so, we appreciate it. One quick thing I want to do is shout out Pub Sports Radio's new and improved website, you guys. This show, the replay of the Die Hard MMA podcast, will be up there, and that website is clean. It looks so good, and it's just one easy little click over to the shop if you want to get yourself a Die Hard Stimulus check t-shirt. Check out the shop at Pub Sports Radio, and seriously, go take a look at the new website. It's awesome. Next fight up, Andrei Arlovski taking on Jared Vanderaa. Andrei Arlovski, just an absolute legend in the sport. Been around forever. 32-20, taking on Jared Vanderaa, 12-6. Relatively new to the UFC still at this point. Jared's had 4 fights, going 2-2 so far in the organization. Andrei Arlovski, I talk about this every single time, Matt. Every time. We all left this man for dead. He had chin issues. He wasn't durable anymore. He was getting knocked out left and right. And now he's rattled off this winning run here in the UFC. And he has just been surviving on high fight IQ and volume. That's what this guy does. He has been scraping by, though, on the absolute bottom of the UFC's heavyweight division, in my opinion. And that is something that I think hasn't been stated enough. I think there's a lot of people out there that kind of get mixed signals on what Andrei Arlovski is right now. So I just want to run back over the last couple of wins here. So he gets by Big Ben Rothwell. Okay. That, Ben's definitely an age-appropriate opponent for him. He gets deaded in round 1 by Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Okay, maybe, the second or the third hardest puncher the UFC has ever seen. He beats Philip Lins. Now, everybody saw that as a big upset. Philip Lins is not UFC caliber, folks. I know he won the PFL tournament, but he's garbage, and he hasn't done anything since he's gotten over to the UFC. He gets a win over Tanner Boser. I don't care who says what. Tanner Boser won that fight. That was a bad scorecard, and Tanner Boser came out pissed off in the next fight and really hurt somebody because he should have gotten the nod there that night. I do not believe that Arlovski deserved the W against Tanner Boser. He gets rocked, clubbed, and subbed by Tom Aspinall. And then he beats Chase Sherman, who probably is going to get cut here. And then he beats Carlos Felipe, a guy who just got popped for steroids and has also been cut from the organization, but was really struggling to find his footing in the organization as well. So I personally am still just not at all impressed with Andrei Arlovski's run. His fight IQ, his ring savvy, he's been able to skate by a couple of these guys that he's just barely been able to get one over, and that's really his experience breaking through. Jared Vanderaa, like I said, 2-2 in the UFC. He ground and pounds Harry Huntsucker out in his Contender Series fight. He takes an L to Sergey Spivak. He takes an L to Alexander Romanov. And then he has a back and forth fun fight against Justin Tafa where he was, he had this cut about this big on his head, but it was bleeding everywhere and looked like a murder scene. What we see with Jared Vanderaa is volume. This guy is crazy active on the feet. And what he struggles with is these big, high-powered wrestlers. If you can take Jared Vanderaa down and smother him from top position, he has a tough time. But if you go back and you watch that Romanov fight, Matt, I had a big bet on Alexander Romanov. He was in a parlay, and I was sweating bullets because in that first round, Vanderaa had much improved urgency and much improved get-up and much improved cardio. So he actually was wearing Romanov out, and I thought Romanov was going to be dead in round 2 because he came out taking some big, deep breaths. He did not immediately go back to the takedown. He was slowing down in a bad way. Finally gets a takedown, and then that was just kind of too much for Jared Vanderaa to overcome. My point is, Jared Vanderaa impressed me in that loss. And I think he's the worst matchup possible for Mr. Andrei Arlovski. This is a bet that I looked way ahead of time and locked in, Matt. I think plus 165 is the number that I got several weeks ago. And I got 3 units. I'm laying a hammer on my guy Jared Vanderaa here in this spot, Matt. I don't think he should be the underdog. I think the wrong guy is favored, and they opened him like plus 200. They made him a massive underdog. Folks, Andrei Arlovski doesn't wrestle. Like, the one spot where you're going to beat Jared Vanderaa is taking him down on repeat, exhausting him, and then laying on top of him. And then he's kind of a fish out of water. He's supposedly a black belt, but maybe only from top position. But you can choke this guy out. You can beat him up from top. If he's on his back, he struggles. But if you can't complete takedowns and do it over and over and over, he's going to just pace you on the feet. And he's got a 3-inch reach advantage here. I don't get it, Matt. The wrong guy is favored. I see people lining up on Andrei Arlovski here. And I love this hammer spot. I think it's going to be Vanderaa by murder. I honestly think he can TKO Andrei Arlovski here. The deeper this fight goes, the more it favors him.
So I missed the early numbers on this one. Those numbers you got were amazing. And look, let's face it, we haven't talked about it enough, but he's called the Mountain for a reason. I mean, he's 6'4", 6'5", a big, huge, tall guy with a giant reach advantage here. The one thing I think he has to be a little bit careful of is we have seen some fighters fall into that trap of, I'll just fight Andrei Arlovski's pace. He's 43 years old. And if you let him, suddenly he'll clinch you up and then the fight gets slow. And even though he won't wrestle you, he'll clinch you up against the fence. And before you know it, 3 rounds went by and no one landed anything. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, the Pitbull Arlovski. And somehow he always gets sentimental value and probably extra points from the judges because he's 43. He's 14 years older than the Mountain in this fight. So Now that I missed the big plus and I can get like plus 120, I'm a little less excited about jumping on board. I'm going to be interested to see where this line goes. What I did think was value is maybe taking the mountain by KO because Arlovski never gets stopped. But I actually think this is a spot where he could, and thus taking a big plus and taking the mountain by KO in this one.
I really like that, Matt. I really, really like that because one more thing that, I kind of mentioned, but just briefly is that reach advantage for Jared Vanderaa. You look at the guys that Andrei Arlovski has been facing, again, Jairzinho Rosenstruck, dude with big power. Tom Aspinall, crazy fast athletic, dude with big power. Ben Rothwell, no, he's big and slow. Philip Lenz, not really a knockout guy, kind of a volume guy. Tanner Bozer, one of the smallest heavyweights on the roster, a leg kick volume guy, not really a power guy. Chase Sherman, if he hits you flush in the first round. After that, he's a complete quitter and a gasser. He's not doing shit if he doesn't get you knocked out in the first 2 minutes of the fight. Carlos Felipe, all those steroids did not help that man's punching power. He still can't break a grape. Like, that guy goes to decision every single time. He hasn't really fought a threat that's been a knockout artist. And when he does, he's gotten knocked out. Now he's taking on Vanderaa, a guy that's got more pace than anybody on the feet, actually does have that power and has the 3-inch reach advantage. I do think Vanderaa by knockout is extremely live. And if I already laid the hammer, but if I get a little itchy, there's only a couple spots I like on this card. I really have only made 2 bets so far. Maybe we just double down and go for a knockout.
Yeah, I do agree with that here. I mean, people tend to overrate the durability of Arlovski late in his career. First of all, there is no 43-year-olds with durability in the heavyweight division. I think it's been advantageous matchmaking more than durability for Arlovski. And his last 2 losses, he was finished. Aspinall and Rosenstruck both finished him. So at the end of the day, I do think that there's a fairly good chance the 29-year-old, I'm just going to keep calling him the Mountain, not Jared, Jared, just the Mountain. If I'm going to bet the Mountain, I'm going to take the big plus and do it by KO.
I like that. And just a couple of, comments here. Mbe saying, I thought Vanderaa is a volume guy. Is he a power puncher? Well, no, not really. But we do see the volume eventually crack people. I think that's more my point. I'm not thinking he's going to one-hitter quitter Andrei Arlovski, but man, when you're 44 years old and you've taken 112 significant strikes about 12 minutes into the fight, eventually it becomes a problem. And we have seen Jared Vanderaa be dangerous from top position. So if for whatever reason they end up in a scramble or this thing gets on the ground, that boy knows how to put his body weight behind a punch once it's on the mat. So I do think he is live for the KO. Again, not the one-hitter quitter type that we see with Rosenstruck or the Black Beast, but he could pull it off. All right, so we agree here on the dog. Value is not what it once was, but again, like I said, guys, I personally feel like Jared Vanderaa should be favored in this spot. So if there's any plus next to that line, personally, I'd vouch for taking it. But, as always on this show, I'm going to tell you what I am going to bet. You be, big adults and make your own decisions and put your money on there where you feel you think there is value. Next fight up, Roxanne Modafferi taking on Casey O'Neill. Oh boy, Roxanne Modafferi, just a absolute legend, one of the women's pioneers. We think this is her retirement fight. 25-19. Taking on King Casey, 8-0. The script writes itself here, Matt. This is a spot where the UFC is really trying to get a known name on the record of Casey O'Neill. Roxanne Modafferi, awkward offbeat striking, really relies on her grappling, but she's been putting the work in as far as her strength and conditioning program, for the last 2 years or so, something she never did when she was young. And you could really see it. You could really see it make a difference. She's having a little bit of durability problems, though, the older she gets. She's been around forever. She's taken some big punches, but she's been able to work through it recently, even through the run of killers the UFC has put her through recently. So can't really worry too much about that. Her wrestling and her BJJ are really the upsides here. Now, Roxy is going to be 1 inch taller. And the note that I left for myself here, Matt, is that as sweet as Roxy is, she's a bully. When she can bully her opponent physically in the cage, that's when she wins. Now, Casey O'Neill is MMA Twitter's brand new favorite. She is the darling of every UFC fan around the planet right now. She's strong, she's explosive, and boy, does she put a pace on people. she is way more dangerous deep in the fight when her opponents start to slow down. That's something that we've seen. Those, late second round or third round finishes when her opponents just run out of gas trying to keep up with her. But what we saw when she faced Antonina Shevchenko was that she got out-muscled in the grappling situations, Matt. She went for some very strange throws and trips, and she got reversed by Antonina. She got crucifix mounted by Antonina. This is a spot where when they made this matchup, everybody in the chat knows Roxy is the female version of Sam Alvey for me. I love backing her in select spots. She's always undervalued. She comes through as a big dog every once in a while. And I swore I was not going to be backing her in this spot, Matt. I really did. And then I watched that Antonina Shevchenko, Casey O'Neill fight. And I went, oh boy, if Roxy wins when she's the bully, this is a spot where she could be the bully. She is going to be the bigger woman in there. And Casey O'Neill does her best work from tight range. She does not strike at distance. When she's at distance, she got pieced apart by her opponents. She's got to get in the clinch. She's got to be in boxing range. She's got to be smothering her opponent up against the fence with takedowns. And to be in that close quarters with Roxanne Modafferi is asking for a takedown. It's asking for a body lock. It's asking for those grinding clinch situations. Call me insane, Matt, but I think we might ride with Roxanne Modafferi one last time. She's a plus 300 underdog, the minus 400 price tag on Casey O'Neill. Am I insane?
I wanted to ride it with you. I was looking for reasons to bet Modafferi, and I went back and watched that Andrea Lee fight because Andrea Lee looked great in her last fight, and I was like, oh, man, I forgot that Modafferi, really beat up Andrea Lee. That was a good win, and, she was a big dog against Macy Barber and pulled it out there, and they both beat Antonia Shevchenko. But the one thing that I've seen about Casey O'Neill in her 3 fights is she's gotten in a little bit of trouble in all 3, and then she's been able to get finishes. But it is hard to finish Roxy. 8 straight fights have gone the distance. She's only 2-4 in her last 6 fights. So, she's had plenty of trouble, lost plenty of fights lately, on a 2-fight losing streak currently. But she rarely gets finished. Again, 8 straight fights that have gone the distance. I'm just wondering what happens to Casey O'Neill, who even at 24 years old hasn't quite learned yet how to pace herself properly throughout a fight. I wonder if this is one of those situations where, to your point, if Roxanne, as a pretty substantial dog here, about a plus 300 dog, looks good, even if she loses the first round, if it's competitive and she looks like she's going to be able to impose her size a little bit, where you don't take a play with Roxy in play. And I'm sure most of the books will have in play on all these fights because it's a pay-per-view card. That's the beauty of these pay-per-view cards, is it's easy to get in play bets on all these fights. This is one for me where I'm with you. I want to bet Roxy, but I'm nervous that she can keep up with the athleticism of the 24-year-old at 39 years old. I mean, Roxanne's 15 years older than Casey O'Neill here. That really, really concerns me. And I tend to get concerned about fighters in their retirement fight that sometimes they just don't care. They just mail it in. And so I'm wondering what she looks like showing up. But assuming that she looks competitive in round 1, O'Neill seems to me like there could be some gas tank issues as the fight goes on. Even though she's only 24 years old, I'd be much more interested taking a flyer on Roxy in play than I think of even taking a shot, pre-match here at the plus 300 number.
I don't hate that at all, Matt. I don't. And that is one of the rules I try to adhere to, is that you don't bet on retiring fighters. Like if they come out and they say before the fight that they are retiring, it's that one foot in the grave mentality. If they're checked out, if they're done, they're not pushing themselves on those last couple of sprints. They're not showing up in class, in camp, working the way they used to. They know they're done after this one. And we've seen people really let down because they know that they're going to close the book after that one. The reason I almost feel...
Remember Marlon Vera, when he was a throwaway to Brad Pickett in his hometown in his farewell retirement fight, and he just torched Brad Pickett. And you just see some of these guys, they don't go out the best way.
Yeah, yeah. And really, the only reason I'm almost considering this a little bit differently, and I'm actually going to wait. I have not bet this fight just yet. I want to see what Roxy's attitude is when she does her interviews. I want to hear her
Yeah.
talk. I want to see what she looks like on the scales. I want to see if she took this fight camp seriously or not, because this is one of those spots where Roxy really has had a chip on her shoulder the last year or two, Matt. She has not gotten the recognition that she deserves from the MMA community because she has been a pioneer, because she has been around for so long, but she never got her hands on that belt. There's so many people that have counted her out, and it didn't used to bother her. Now that her career is winding down, you can see that it's bothering her. She's made some comments and said some things that it's very clear that she feels like she deserves more respect. She's the kind of fighter who especially is smart enough to know that she's getting kind of set up here in this spot on her way out the door. If she is still at all in this thing, she'll fight her ass off for her retirement fight, just to show everybody one last time that she was legit on her way out. So I want to hear her. I want to see what she's got to say. I want to know what her response is when one of the, guys, because they always ask the dumb questions that, if someone asks her if she's being set up by the UFC or something like that, I want to hear her response. You look at her last couple of fights, Talia Santos, a tank of a woman, Vivia Rujo, a grappling machine, an absolute monster in the future of this division. She's going to be a problem. And then Andrea Lee, who she got the win over. That win looks fantastic in hindsight. Yeah. And then Lauren Murphy, who's maybe the strongest female fighter in this weight class. Like, one out of those four was somebody who she potentially could contend with, power for power, strength for strength. And that's where, like I said, if Roxy has a strength advantage, she tends to win these fights. I'm not saying she's a lock. I'm not saying that she's definitely going to win. But at plus 300, you're looking at like a 25% implied probability of her winning. And I know a lot of people don't look at fights this way and don't really understand that that's how you actually do and handle sports betting. But if you think Roxanne Modafferi has better than a 25% chance of winning on Saturday, you back her at plus 300. And that's kind of where I'm sitting. I feel like she shouldn't be favored. But I mean, 35 or 40%, I think you can make an argument there.
I agree. I think you're right. And look, let's see how she looks this week. And maybe it doesn't have to be in play. I think you brought up a really good point. Maybe it doesn't have to be in play here, but we have to get more information throughout the week. What is her mindset? What's her motivation? How does she look? We don't have that information now, so we can't bet until we get it.
That's where I'm sitting, Matt. I completely agree, and I want to wait on that info. Let's move some of these fights along as we get down the card here. Thank you all so much for joining us here for this show. We've got Alex Perez taking on Matt Schnell. And, talking about speeding the pace of the show up here just a little bit, I have talked about this fight already 3 freaking times, Matt. They have canceled and rescheduled this damn fight 3 times. Now, I thought it was going to happen last time, but Matt Schnell had an awful weight cut. They called it, after everybody had made weight. I made a big bet on Perez because Matt Schnell looked like death on the scales, and I was going to cash that one easy, but the commission saved him there. I think Alex Perez is a runaway favorite here in this spot, Matt. I mean, Matt Schnell, he's got the technique, he's got the skill, he scrambles well, he's got good boxing, but his durability has always been a problem, and he can't wrestle against a guy like Alex Perez. Perez has got that explosive double leg takedown. Matt Schnell will play jiu-jitsu off his back. Perez wins the decision. If Matt Schnell wants to strike with Perez, it's just one blitz attack away from a highlight reel KO. Perez has got those nasty leg kicks. If they want to play on the feet, Perez is just going to chop the tree down. I really don't see a spot except for the pure BJJ that Matt Schnell really has an advantage here. And I don't think that whole skip a jab off his forehead for 15 minutes style is going to work in this spot. Do you think that we're disrespecting the dog here in Matt Schnell a little bit, or do you like the favorite in this spot, Matt?
No, I agree. I think Matt Schnell is one of those guys that in the prime of his career a few years ago had a 4-fight winning streak between October 2017 and August of 2019. But a lot of those opponents, to your point, were sort of tailor-made. Luis Smoka, Marco Beltran, Jordan Espinoza. None of those guys were great, and they also kind of fit his style a little bit. But every time we've seen Schnell step up, including I watched again the Alexander Pantoja fight just to remember And he's really outgunned at the most elite level. We're talking about an Alex Perez whose only losses ever come against the champ, or at least in the UFC, come against the champ, and Joseph Benavidez when he was still competing for titles. It's hard for me to envision a situation where Schnell wins this fight, but at minus 400, nobody's running to the window to bet minus 400 favorites. This is MMA. Things can still happen. Schnell could catch him in a variety of potential submission attempts. So I don't know. Maybe it's a parlay builder for those folks that like building parlays.
I completely agree with that. I actually think that he is a solid parlay piece. The only problem for me, Matt, is this fight's been canceled 3 different times. I want to wait and see these guys on the damn scale. Like, I'm not going to waste my money on this fight until I see that it's actually going to happen, because at this point, it's like Tony versus Khabib. Like, I'm not convinced it's actually going to happen. So, not really sure that this is something that I'm going to have a play on. I would like to parlay Perez. More than likely, I'm just going to play him straight by knockout, because I really do think he probably finishes Matt Schnell in this spot more often than not. And we'll take it from there, but I got to see weigh-ins before I make a move on it.
Look, 125's, not a very deep division. The UFC, I'm sure, would love to get their under 30-year-old, 29-year-old young talent like Perez another win. And this is the perfect guy to do it. A guy in his early 30s that's a veteran like Matt Schnell who can go in there. And to your point, if Schnell really wants to, he could probably lose a one-sided 3-round decision, but go the distance. He's a fine enough test. And at this point, you need to get Perez a win. So it makes sense. And there's just not a ton of guys in this division. So sometimes we get more mismatches at 125 than we do other divisions, just because the division doesn't have the depth.
I agree. And I do think that Matt Schnell is skilled. I just think that the durability is the problem. And I think this is maybe the worst case scenario type of opponent for him, honestly. Real quick, I want to bounce back to a couple people here. Jonathan Reynolds, don't you remind me about the Laura Procopio fight. I stay awake at night wondering how Laura Procopio is doing these days. Her medical issue that caused that fall off in that fight was something legendary. She was kicking the crap out of Casey O'Neill until she had that problem, and she has not returned to the cage since because she has not been medically cleared to do so. Procopio was going to beat that ass. Make no mistake. And then Rick the Ruler, you're asking how we're figuring out plus 300 means 25% chance. What metrics do I use? I like to use betmmatips.com because most people can do this math, but I'm not a particularly smart person. So they have these cool betting tools here, and they have the odds conversion tool, the parlay odds calculator. You can do a lot of really cool stuff here. Shout out to betmmatips.com. We've got, you right here, put your decimals in and it'll spit out a percentage probability that factors out. And then of course the decimal side of things, if you're using a book that is not, US based, sometimes they go off of those numbers. So that's the site that I go to use for those probabilities. It's pretty easy to convert them over there. Next fight up, we have got here Will Knight taking on Maxim Grishin. Let me adjust that there so their names get in the screen here for you. Thick Willie, man, I cannot say enough good things about my guy, Will Knight. I know everybody's got some hot takes on the man. He's had a couple of up and down performances in the UFC. He looked a little sketchy a couple times, but I actually really like Will Knight. First off, he's a cool dude. Like, as a person, I really like Will Knight. I want to see him succeed, but his physique is just something else, Matt. And he comes from the Yoel Romero school of fighting where he explodes and reloads. Like, I don't know how he does it, but he is fresh as a daisy in that third round. You see a man with that kind of muscle on him, they would be completely gassed at the 7-minute mark. Somehow he finds the perfect little spots to take breaks and then get his breath back. And he gets in there and goes back to war. He has 3rd-round knockouts. He hits hard as a truck late in the fight. I love that he carries that deep with him. And, he may have been gifted one ever so slightly against Alonzo Menifield, a bit of a controversial decision. But really what we've seen from him is similar to Roxy. When he has the ability to overpower his opponent, which is more often than not, he handles them. He showed off. He's got some striking power against Fabio, Cherant, counter left hook, 1st round. And that fight was sloppy. You go back and you watch that fight. It was sloppy. But he also came into that fight with a chip on his shoulder. It was sloppy purposefully. He wanted to hurt Fabio Cherant. He wanted to come in and send a message in that fight. He was not playing it slow. He was not playing the grappling because everyone was bitching about all of his fights being boring. He went, okay, came in, put the dude to sleep in the first round. Maxim Grishin, if anything, Matt, honestly, and this may sound disrespectful, but I promise I'm not trying to be, he just seems mid-tier to me. The man is 37 years old. He's a journeyman at this stage. He's a little big for 205. He's a little too small for heavyweight. He slows down as the fight goes on. He doesn't have particularly good volume. His grappling is decent in general. He's not a great wrestler, but his submissions are on point if he can get on top of you on the mat. I mean, he's a guy that if he got to the UFC 5 years ago, I think we really could have had some fun with. But the longer his career is dragged on, the older he is. He's kind of in the twilight here. I think he's going to have a couple of fun fights and then kind of flare out. And a guy like Will Knight is exactly the kind of guy that's going to take advantage of the holes in his game. I think this fight is going to be competitive early, but then the later we go, I mentioned the way Will Knight can explode and reload. Grishin doesn't do that. Grishin gets slower and slower and slower the way the fight goes on. I think that eventually Will Knight's going to get him to the floor and smother him either in round 2 or round 3, probably get a TKO victory. And I like him here as the underdog. I did make a 2-unit bet. I think I got plus 155 on Will Knight. He's down to plus 145. You can get Maxim Grishin at about minus 165, minus 170. How do you feel about this fight playing out, Matt?
I'm actually, and I think most people look at William Knight's physique, and he's one of those guys. He needs to work on his nickname because it's the Nightmare, but it's K-N-I, like a night. Mm-hmm. But you don't know that when you say it. You don't know the difference between Nightmare spelled with an N or a K. So someone should work on that with him. But anyway, because of his physique, I feel like we all think he's a knockout puncher, and that's what he does. But I actually think this is a situation where you could bet him to win by decision. He's won 2 of his 3 wins come by decision in the UFC. I actually thought this fight was a pick'em. I'm with you. I think Maxim Grishin is really mid-tier in the UFC. I mean, most of his fights came in M1 Global and that WFCA, and then he came over to PFL and had some success, but he also had a couple of boring draws in PFL and and then he ends up coming to UFC where he's 1-2. And it's not like these 1-2 and fought world beaters. He fought Dustin Jacoby and lost to Marcin Tybura when he tried to move up to heavyweight. And they gave him a small heavyweight. And he still didn't look good. I mean, Tybura really handled him in that fight. It was a boring fight. I think both William Knight and Grishin here throw less strikes than people realize. I get the physiques of those 2 guys, and they're big guys at 85 make you think, oh, these guys are going to throw down. I'm not so sure. Watch their fights. They're both so super low volume that I think that you can get a pretty good price. And I think if you take William Knight by decision here, you could get a pretty good payoff. And I might just throw a half unit on the Nightmare, K-I-N-I-G, by decision.
I don't hate that at all, Matt. I don't hate that one bit. I think the way these guys match up, it's kind of set for an over. I mean, it depends on where they come in. It looks like, the bookies are wise to it. They've got it set at 2.5. It looks like minus 165, minus 170 to the over. So I kind of thought with that quick knockout, maybe we'd be getting a little extra value there, but they know. I do think that Knight is capable of a decision here. And when I actually tweeted the pick out, which, by the way, anybody that is new to the show, I tweet all my actions. So if you want to see my official picks, make sure you follow me on Twitter. I did answer the question that I do think that Knight is capable of winning this thing really any way he wants to. Because when Maxim Grishin slows down, the sub is going to be there for Knight. Believe it or not, he does have some grappling. And then the KO is going to be there via ground and pound. But more than likely, this is going to be one of those classic heavyweight, or in this case, light heavyweight, grindy fence cage, slow style fights. And it could easily go to the judges' scorecards. So I'm with you there. I think over, and I think Will Knight by decision isn't a bad look, even though I think he's still on that make a statement train. So I think if he's got the opportunity to KO, he's going to look for it.
Yeah, and I think, maybe. I just think that's probably the value in terms of getting some big odds on here if you're going to throw a flyer.
I'm guessing at the mindset. You've got the value side. I'm saying I think he's pissed off. All right. Next fight up, Ronnie Lawrence taking on Mana Martinez. And this is a fun fight, Matt. This one,
Yes.
I am excited about this one. Ronnie Lawrence, unfortunately, is another one of these guys that should have been back a whole hell of a lot sooner. Back-to-back canceled fights. He was supposed to fight Castaneda. Thank you very much that Castaneda didn't have to fight Ronnie Lawrence. Actually ended up having to withdraw because of a bad weight cut against Trevin Jones, a spot that I was very curious to see how those two matched up. But shout out to my guy, James Lynch. Did an interview with this man and found out that it wasn't just a botched weight cut. He actually had a staph infection and COVID, and that's why he couldn't make weight and had his body shutting down on him against Trevin Jones. So holy hell, glad he's okay coming through both those things at the same time. But Ronnie is just a redonkulous grappler, Matt. Nice footwork. He likes to cut angles. He's always on his toes. He plays the outside. He's actually got really clean striking, but he uses it perfectly to set up those takedowns. Right when you get lulled into point karate style fighting, that's when he dips in on the double leg and blasts you to the floor. He averages 10.86 takedowns per 15 minutes. 10 takedowns, nearly 11 takedowns per 15 minutes at a 76.92% accuracy. Again, shout out my guy Uncle Weezy for that. But holy shit, Matt. This guy goes for takedowns and gets them. Like, that's the whole fight. Mana Martinez, 9-2, apparently just moved over to Glory MMA, which I love to see from a talented young fighter. They got a good roster building over there. James Krause knows what he's doing from a game plan perspective, but he is tall and he is long. This guy knows how to use that reach. He likes to big wing hooks to the body. He's got a nice low calf kick. He chips away at his opponents, though. He doesn't seem to have that one-hitter quitter type of power. But man, he is brand new to the UFC. Really only has one actual UFC fight under his belt after the Contender Series. So we're not really sure where he stands. He's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage. He's training with Yanez and Rufian Stotts. I mean, a good group of guys that he's getting to work with here on top of moving out to Glory MMA. But I just feel like Ronnie Lawrence is going to ground this guy. You know, as much as I like Mana Martinez, as much as I think there's upside to Mana Martinez, I can't get around the fact that he's got those long-ass legs, and Ronnie Lawrence is going to be there for a single and a double all freaking night. Ronnie Lawrence is minus 300, plus 230, plus 240 for Mana Martinez, and I expect Ronnie Lawrence to dominate this thing wrestling. How do you see this fight playing out, Matt?
I bet 1.25 on Mana Martinez. I just really like the striking advantages I think he's going to have here. And at 5'10", he is so big for this division. I mean, huge. He's taller than some of the middleweights that are on this same card. I mean, he's literally 5'10 and a half. I do think he could have some problems with the grappling. But what I've heard out of the gym down there in Houston is that this kid's defense is better than we think. His takedown defense is better than people think. He's working diligently on it. And if this fight stays on its feet, I think he could chop him up. But I just like the grit that this kid has. I like that Guido Canetti fight. And if you wonder about his takedown defense and he fought Guido Canetti and he was in there. And so I thought, look, this line's a little wide. We don't really know how good Ronnie Lawrence is at MMA. We just know right now that he's an amazing grappler and his striking's okay. But I actually think Martinez could chop him up. And it could be one of those situations, too, where Ronnie Lawrence is able to get some early takedowns, but tires himself out a little bit. And after the first round, maybe can't get those takedowns so easily anymore. And I think we could see a surging Mana Martinez in the second half of that fight. And I think he could either get a late stoppage in this fight and get a come-from-behind knockout or win 2-1. And so I took a flyer on, at the plus 240 range.
That is one hell of a hot take, Matt. I like it. I like it a lot. You know, I'm always a fan of finding value on those big underdogs. But, I don't have the guts to tail you here on this one, man. I love it. I'll be cheering for it. I am not betting this fight simply because we have seen a lot of fighters get, pulled by the judges because all they do is wrestle and they don't really do anything with top position. Now, Ronnie Lawrence, he's pretty active with his ground and pound, but that's only after he gets his opponents secured. That's only after he can dominate and control those positions. If a kid like Mana Martinez is learning how to scramble, he's got better takedown defense than we expect. If Lawrence is only ever able to ground him a couple times and then it's a kickboxing match for, 3 of the 5 minutes in a round, this one could slip away. And that's the kind of spot where I personally don't want to lay a minus 300 price tag. So I'm picking Ronnie Lawrence. I'm not going to change my pick here, but I see what you're saying. And I haven't parlayed him or anything like that because honestly, I like Leo Man. I think he's got the opportunity to show up and do something big here. And I don't really want to get in his way. Hey, I mean, do you ever have a fighter that you're just like, I don't want to bet against this guy?
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's sometimes part of why we back dogs, because we just don't want to get in front of them. And if the price is right, why not get on them?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, there's a couple people in the chat pointing out that, he got swept by Guido Canetti and he didn't look good in the grappling and those types of situations. And I agree. That's another spot where that's kind of why I lean towards Ronnie Lawrence here. But Glory MMA, we know they're all about wrestling. So if anyone's going to patch that takedown defense and get up, game up, it's going to be a guy like Krause. So that one will be fun to watch. Our next fight we're talking about is Alexander Hernandez taking on Renato Moicano. And boy, let me tell you, Alexander Hernandez making his glorious return to the state of Texas. One thing that we have all forgotten about during COVID is hometown advantage, folks. The UFC doesn't go anywhere. We're always in Vegas. People are flying in. There is no such thing as hometown advantage in Las Vegas. But when the UFC does hit the road, we saw it in Bellator when they came to Phoenix and got a couple of hometown boys the nod. I mean, we saw the last time Alexander Hernandez fought in Texas. He absolutely got that judge's rub, and here we go again. He's an underdog to Renato Moicano in this spot. Hernandez is plus 140, plus 150 in that ballpark. You got minus 165, minus 175 on Renato Moicano. And this is a spot where, man, I really wanted to back Alexander Hernandez. I'll be honest with you, Matt. That was one of the spots that really jumped out at me on this card, as I wanted to kind of take a buy low approach here. He's a guy that is super explosive, knows how to wrestle. Killer instinct is fantastic. But when he steps up in competition, he has just floundered every single time. If he gets a mid-tier fighter, if he gets a UFC debut type of guy, he smashes those types of fighters. But he really struggles to maintain his pace in rounds 2 and 3. He's a lot like Conor McGregor, where if you drag him deep, he just isn't the same guy. He slows down and he gasses out if he doesn't kill you in that first round. And Moicano, he has smooth, flowing boxing. This guy's got good, solid, strong BJJ, uses the body lock, looks for trips for his takedowns, but he's a bit of a glass cannon. He's got those chin issues. He's a guy that's been knocked out by big hitters. I mean, Aldo, Zombie, Fazeev. I mean, big-time power punchers have absolutely flattened this guy, and he's learned about that. He didn't mess around with the striking against guys like Damir Hadzovic or Jai Herbert. He took them down immediately, trying to stay away from that power on the feet. The only reason I haven't bet Alexander Hernandez in this spot here, Matt, is because I almost feel like it's a round one or bust type of situation, and that terrifies me. I also don't really want to lay minus 175 or minus 180 on Renato Moicano when he could easily get starched in the first minute and a half on this fight. I'm a little frozen here because I think in round 1, it's Alexander Hernandez all day. But if he doesn't get the win, I think the longer the fight goes, the more it favors Renato Moicano.
I actually bet Hernandez here to win the fight plus 140 and by KO in this fight already. Look, his last 2 wins are by knockout, and he owns a win over, a knockout win over Beneil Dariush. A lot of people forget that. Alexander Hernandez actually knocked out Beneil Dariush. I think he has unbelievable power early in these fights. Look, Moicano, for all the love he gets, is 2 and 3 in his last 5 fights, hasn't had that much more success since moving up to 55 now. And we get a big guy who's a strong guy at 55, certainly shorter in this fight. But I'm all over Hernandez. I really like him in this spot. I think he's going to get there early. And I got him to win and by KO.
Okay, fair enough. And that's kind of the take that I had to begin with. That was really where I was leaning early. So we'll see where this thing ends up going. I might still end up jumping on the Hernandez train. I see he's a pretty popular underdog right now, and I get it. I try to fade Renato Moicano's chin. I look for opportunities to do that. He's just so fragile. But this might be a decent violence bet type of situation too, because we've seen Alexander Hernandez slow down and have trouble against high-tier opponents the later the fight goes. Maybe we look for an under 2.5 or fight doesn't go the distance. That way, if Hernandez wins by knockout the way we feel like he should, great. If he ends up losing and giving up a submission in the second round, then you still end up cashing that ticket.
Sure. And this is one of those weird fights too, where I'm seeing some of the books offering 1.5 over as the round prop, but some of them are offering 2.5 under. So, if you don't want to lay juice either way, depending on what you want to bet, then just look at different books, because there's plenty of 1.5 and 2.5s available on this fight.
Yep. I completely agree. So again, no move for me, and I'm really kind of undecided as far as who I think is going to win this fight. I guess I'll say Alexander Hernandez. If I got to make a call, I'll say Alex, but he's another guy that's given me trust issues. I've been burned by that man before. Next fight up, Carlos Ulberg taking on Fabio Cherant. And this is, the deeper we go on this card, the more interesting things get. These next couple fights are sketchy as all get out, Matt. Carlos Ulberg, 3-1, just barely getting his chops going here in MMA. He's a city kickboxing guy, and let's be real, he's an Adonis. Like, this is the guy the ladies get called up for. Boys, when you take your girl to a live UFC event, Carlos Ulberg is the one you got to watch out for. He had an extremely disappointing UFC debut. Hit Kennedy with the kitchen sink in round 1. And then when Kennedy was able to take his best shots, came back and absolutely overwhelmed him. He likes to rip the body. You love to see that. High-level kickboxer. He mixes up his attacks, leg, body, head. He's going to have a 3-inch reach advantage here in this spot. And it's pretty obvious to me what the UFC is looking for here in this particular spot. Fabio Cherant, 7-3 as a pro. He's 0-3 on the UFC, counting his contender series opportunity there. And it looks like the UFC is really just bringing in this guy to get Ulberg a win. Ulberg seems to be the guy that is much more, impressive, who's much more marketable. He comes from the gym. Everybody knows, training partners with the champ. Like, that's the guy you're looking for. Fabio Cherant, though, he's got kind of an underrated ground game. We haven't really had much of a chance to see it in the UFC because he's fought these big one-hitter quitter type guys. He jumps guard. He jumps that ghillie sometimes trying to get the fight to the floor. He's got a good body lock. He can pin people up against the fence and drag them down that way. The problem is he kind of caves under pressure. He's the type of guy that if you hit him right smack in the mouth, he doesn't really have the will or the desire or the durability to dig deep and keep on coming. But there's this crazy little voice in the back of my head, Matt, that tells me that a 3-1 Ulberg shouldn't be this big of a favorite over a 7-3 fighter. Like, I know Cherant hasn't looked great in the UFC. I know he hasn't. And Carlos Ulberg, he's got that one-hitter quitter power, but he's also a kickboxer. We saw him get tired against Kennedy. I mean, if Fabio Cherant comes in here and pins him up against the fence and fishes for underhooks and drags him to the floor, what does Ulberg look like in round 2? Is he still going to be able to come out and flatline him in round 2? Is he even going to be able to survive the grappling under a big monster like Fabio Cherant when he hits the mat? I don't know.
And he's got a lot going on, Ulberg. So he's a part-time model. He does tons of modeling work as a professional model. He just gave up the rugby career. He was doing that part-time rugby, semi-pro rugby forever. I mean, this guy isn't a career fighter. He's not a student of the game. He's just an unbelievable athlete and now a model. To Clint's point, he's the best-looking guy, steal your girl at the fights guy, for sure. I mean, he literally is a professional model, but he has 4 MMA fights, and after he didn't get the KO in round 1 in his last fight, he looked helpless. But on the other side, we're talking about a guy on Cherant here who doesn't look like he belongs in the UFC. At this point, if you're getting dominated that badly by Alonzo Menafield, William Knight, and Alexa Kamer, where are you going to go? And he looked terrible on all 3 fights. And I know he's a grappling whiz. He has 0 KOs, so he needs to get the fight to the ground. He was unable to do so against really big, strong guys in Menafield and William Knight. But I just have zero confidence in either one of these guys. There's no way I'm laying that big of a price with the part-time model, part-time rugby, part-time kickboxer turned MMA fighter. But on the other side, there's just nothing I like about Cherant. I am staying as far away from this one as I possibly can. And this, if you got to take a bathroom break, get a drink, grab a beer, here's my fight to do it.
This is Matt's fireball and popcorn fight
Yes.
of the evening. Get yourself a drink, get yourself a snack. Yep, I hear you there, Matt. But I mean, the degenerate inside me is extremely tempted to buy here on Fabio Cherant. Because I mean, if there was ever a spot that the world could be lower on this man, it's, this has got to be it. Nobody could think less of him right now. And believe it or not, the bookies opened this lineup a decent little bit tighter. Fabio Cherant was a plus 165 underdog. He's, all the money has come in on Ulberg. He's now about plus 200. And honestly, I got to wonder what Cherant by, submission or decision kind of look like when those come out, because I think he's got paths to victory there. And he's training with Derrick Brunson now. That's a guy that he can really learn a lot from, especially, hiding and covering for those chin issues, using the offensive wrestling and the grappling. It looks like he might have gotten a little bit of time in it, fight ready, which you all know that's an angle that I absolutely line up on. If he took a trip out to Arizona and learned some wrestling from none other than Henry Cejudo, Triple C, got some work with John Jones, like this could be the coming out party for a guy that is solid in the grappling against a primary striker. So, buckle in, folks. Believe it or not, I might be backing Fabio Cherant on Saturday.
Good luck.
Oh God, it makes me sick to my stomach just saying it.
Some of the best bets are hard to make.
Oh, you know what, Matt? We always say that, right? The best bets on the table are the toughest ones to pull the trigger on because they do not look pretty. The ones that jump out at you and are super obvious, usually those are the traps. All right, next fight up, we got Jacob Malkoun taking on AJ Dobson. Dana White Contender Series fade in full effect here, folks. AJ Malkoun, I still don't know what to make of this guy, Matt. He got brought into the UFC, training partner for Robert Whittaker, got starched by Phil Hawes early in round 1 in his UFC debut. But I mean, when Hawes wins, that's what he does, right? Like you kind of fully expect to see that be the case. Then he comes out and looks like a world beater against Abdulrazak Al Hassan, a guy who at that point really still wasn't himself. That was still kind of the shell of Abdulrazak Al Hassan, but he's also another front runner. He's also another one round or bust type of guy. And Malkoun was just able to stick to him like glue, just able to stay on him and absolutely mat him every time he had the opportunity, stay away from the striking. And he got it done that way. AJ Dobson, 6-0, undefeated, coming in here. BJJ purple belt, 3-inch reach advantage, coming off a big knockout win on Dana White's Contender Series. He came out reckless on that show. He was looking to put on a show for Dana White, dropped his hands and went for it. Got the damn thing, got the contract. He's got good, strong top position.
Mistaking him for somebody else? I thought he won by rear naked choke on DWCS.
Did he club and sub him? I thought he pounded him through the floor.
Let me look. I'll have to look because I thought it was a club and sub for sure.
It might have been. Now that you say that, I might have got the wrong note here. I mean, either way, he melted the guy.
Yeah, he did.
It was. You're right. It was a rear naked choke. It was Hashim. It was the guy. You know what? And actually, now that I look at it, I bet on Hashim. I did actually back against AJ Dobson in that spot, but that was more of a buy on Hashim than it was a fade on Dobson. For anybody wondering. Yeah. So he beat Hashim up, made him turn his back and choked him out. Still very impressive in my opinion.
Yep.
It's a spot where this kid's coming off the Contender Series. He's stepping in for his UFC debut and he's favored over a guy who's been here. That is exactly the spot where I line up to fade him, but I'm late to the party, folks. We've got Malkoun opening up as about a plus 130, plus 135 underdog. He's now even money, and the line is closing in here on evens. We got minus 110s popping up on both sides. You can get AJ Dobson minus 120, minus 125 in a couple of spots. It looks like this line is dangerously close to flipping here, Matt. And it's funny because this is almost exactly my spot. I've been talking about it for weeks and weeks and weeks, but I think we see classes in Dana White's Contender Series. I think there's a group of guys that are just bodies. They show up, they fight their ass off, they look impressive. You get them in the UFC for 3 or 4 fights, and then you cut them. They're cheap labor for the UFC right now when COVID is, making it hard for them to find true talent. And then you get a couple of gems. You get a couple of fighters that really are prospects and are gonna do damage in the UFC. And I kind of think that's what AJ Dobson is. He's training in Ohio with Matt the Immortal Brown. He's working under Mark Coleman. Guys that really know their way around the UFC. They know what this level looks like. And he had an interview with James Lynch where he actually talked about being a bit slower. He was showing off for Dana White, trying to get that opportunity, trying to get that contract. And he knows he needs to kind of take what his opponent gives him here in this spot. That's the kind of mentality, the shift from being a kid on the regional scene to being a fighter that's UFC caliber that I kind of look for. I am going to wait for this line to flip, and then I'm actually going to bet AJ Dobson. I think Jacob Malkoun is mid-tier at best. His striking is not great, and his wrestling is really the only thing that he's got going for him. I think that if Dobson does what he says he's going to, and he takes his time, he is not quite so reckless, I think when he gets a hole, he's going to murder Jacob Malkoun. I think he's going to get a, one slip up, one defensive lapse, and Malkoun's going to end up KO'd on the floor. That's how I feel this one is going, Matt.
Yeah, I ended up betting the over on this one just because it was 1.5. And I had saw an interview with him too, where I thought the one thing that I thought he was really cognizant of, because I normally bet against every single favorite who's making their UFC debut on a pay-per-view. Making your UFC debut on a pay-per-view as a favorite is an auto fade for me. So I was just going to bet Malkoun. And then I heard an interview with him where he said he planned on taking his time. He understood that, he kind of got after it too quick. And if he does that, Malkoun doesn't have the one punch power to do anything there. So if he really does come out and use a measured approach, this round total is 1.5. So we only have to get through 7.5 minutes here. I could see maybe a late stoppage or something either way, even if the moment gets to him and he gasses like so many UFC debutants do, no problem. We'll get there late. I just thought 1.5 for these guys. This doesn't feel like a fight that's ending in the first 2 or 3 minutes. So I took a little flyer, a half unit on over 1.5 rounds.
Okay. I mean, I kind of see it with the power that Dobson has. I can see it ending early just as much as I could see it ending late. I don't have a strong feel on the total, so I don't want to completely go head to head with you there, but I think I'm going to buy in on Dobson here, Matt. And that's, again, it's against all my Contender Series rules, and it's against your call on, fade the debuting favorite on a big UFC pay-per-view card. But I just don't think much of Malkoun. And I think that a guy like Dobson's in the right place to have enough wrestling to contend with a guy like Malkoun. And both Hawes and Al Hassan. I mean, Al Hassan is a smaller guy at 185. He's a guy that really has fought at 170 the majority of his career, comes up a weight class, doesn't get that early KO, and then gets smothered. That writes itself. That story makes sense. Is he going to be able to do that to Dobson? I don't know that I believe that he can smother Dobson for 15 straight minutes without getting touched once. And if once is all it takes, I'll buy in at -110,
I'm with you. I get you.
All right. Well, I'm going with the Contender Series fighter, folks. It happened. It finally happened. I'm going against my own process here. Next fight up, Douglas Silva de Andrade taking on Sergey Morozov. We've only got 2 more fights to break down. We'll bust through these last couple ones here real quick. Douglas Silva looked like a bag of gold his last fight out. He looked phenomenal at 135. I had my concerns with him making the cut at this late stage of his career, 36 years old, dropping to a new weight class. But he's just like Aldo. He's one of these Brazilian balloons, Matt. Like, he apparently knows how to make that weight cut. Looks like death on the scales and has zero issues filling right back up by fight night, and then fights like a monster. He's explosive. He likes that forward pressure, big blitz attacks, but he kind of loads up on his big power shots. And guys like Jan, Piotr Jan, when he fought the champion, were able to really time that and then change levels on him. And he didn't have much of an answer for that. Sergey Morozov, 17-4. He made his debut against Umar Nurmagomedov. Talk about like a stiff test for your UFC fight. Last fight landed 6 takedowns over Khalid Taha. Just put on a grappling clinic on that kind of guy. I think this fight sets up to be very similar to his last fight, where, I mean, if he plays with Douglas Silva on the feet too much, he could get caught, absolutely. But more often than not, I think he times those level changes, puts Douglas De Silva on his back, and then maybe we see those gas tank issues again because he has to defend the takedowns on repeat. He has to get up on repeat. We see him slow down. The takedowns come easier. I'm kind of feeling a Sergey Morozov decision here in this fight, Matt. What about you?
I love Sergey Morozov here. And, we talked about the loss to Umar Nurmagomedov, who's undefeated. If you go back and look at his last loss before that, it was also to another guy who's still undefeated in Evloev. So, I mean, Morozov's last two, the last two guys to beat him, I think, are combined 31-0. He just doesn't lose to guys that aren't undefeated, basically, at this point. And on the other side, Andrade is used to being the shorter, stronger guy. That's always his MO in all of these fights, right? He's the strong, short guy who's the power puncher. But in this case, they're both 5'6". I actually think Morozov's going to be able to get under Andrade, get takedowns pretty easy, and win a decision or potentially even stop him late.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm not sure about the stoppage so much. It's always an option. It's always something that you potentially could pull off. But he's a tough guy to put away. I mean, we saw him quit on the stool between rounds, or the corner man, threw the towel in versus Piotr Jan. So that wasn't really a true finish loss. So he's a tough guy to put away, but you never know. Wrestling for 12 straight minutes does things to a person. So he could always, phone it in. I see more of a decision, but I don't hate it. I'm glad we line up on the same side on that one, Matt. I think he's definitely parlay piece material, or even if you just feel like pulling out the hammer, you can lay the wood at -200, -225 on him.
Yeah.
All right. Last fight of the night, folks. Jeremiah Wells taking on Mike Methitha, which I always feel like I'm, I'm talking like Thid from Ithage whenever I say his last name. They call him the Blood Diamond. That's much more intimidating of a way to talk about this, man. This fight has me all tied up in knots, Matt, because I have been waiting for Jeremiah Wells to get back in the cage. I loved his UFC debut. I love how explosive this man is. He's a human tank, and he does absolutely everything with raw power. He explodes into double legs, explodes into big power hooks. He can grind people up against the fence. Big knockout upsize, powerful squeeze. He finishes basically everybody. 1-inch reach advantage here for Jeremiah Wells, but he's a little older. That's something we got to admit, that he's 35, he's 36 in that ballpark, and doesn't always have the highest fight IQ. He goes for that kill without relenting, really. I mean, he just doesn't stop. So you got to wonder what he looks like in the second and the third round against a younger, fresher opponent. But Blood Diamond is 3-0. He's only 3-0. He's another one of these guys coming in here from City Kickboxing. He's got the team. He's got the name. He's a training partner. And I saw somewhere that he's got over 100 kickboxing fights, Matt. I couldn't find them for the life of me. I looked everywhere for this 100+ kickboxing fight record, and everywhere I saw is like 1-1 or 1-3. And he won a tournament one time. Like I can't find this ridiculous kickboxing experience that he supposedly has under his belt. So I'm not sold. He was supposed to be facing Orion Koski in this spot, and Jeremiah Wells filled in here on short notice. This is a spot where Mike Mantha wins this thing if it stays on the feet. He's 3-0 in MMA. I want to know how that takedown defense is. If Jeremiah Wells is a smart man and comes to work with his black belt strapped around his waist, he takes this man down on repeat and either ground and pounds or subs him. It should be an easy night at the office. The problem is if Jeremiah Wells does what he usually does and charges forward winging gigantic hooks and misses and burns his gas tank and comes out tired in round 2, he gives Blood Diamond a real solid opportunity to work his way back into this fight and have some kind of spectacular head kick like he's had on the couple of fights I have been able to find.
Yeah, I'm with you. I took the under in this fight just for that reason. I thought either Blood Diamond got subbed or he wins by KO early in this one. And to make that record worse, I looked up and, all these kickboxing matches he has, he's 0-1 in Glory, right? Yeah. You just can't find it. I saw one fight in Glory where he lost. It was a fairly competitive fight, but it ended up losing. That was one of the few kickboxing fights I could find because I was trying to figure out his kickboxing style. But inevitably, look, these are two big, strong guys. I do think either one of them could get a finish on their feet, especially Blood Diamond in the first round. But don't look, Wells could just as easily get a knockout in round one. And then at the end of the day, if Wells gets it to the ground, I don't think it'll last 30 seconds. I think Mathetha's ground defense is so bad that it won't last 30 to 40 seconds on the ground. So I think the under 1.5 here actually has a bit of value.
I like that, Matt. I like that a lot. I hadn't even really considered the total here in this spot, but that makes a ton of sense to me. And the way that Blood Diamond whips that head kick up there, it comes out of nowhere. Like, he's the type of guy that's going to pull off that flash KO that nobody sees coming. So I do think there's something to be said there for that. I kind of hope that Wells comes out with the right mindset and looks to grapple here early, because if he does, he should win easily, but I don't know if I can trust him at this price tag.
I'm with you.
All right. Well, the pick is Wells there for me on that last fight of the night. Folks, I've only got 2 bets locked in on this fight. I only have 2. I am looking to get behind AJ Dobson. I have already bet on William Knight and Jared Vanderaa. Very tempted on my girl Roxanne Modafferi. We need a little bit more info. But really what I'm looking at doing, since we kind of talked through this thing, Matt, is we both really liked Alexander Perez. I just want to make sure the fight actually happens. I lean towards Bobby Green in a buy low if I can get there. And then we were looking at, where'd he go? There was a favorite that we both liked. And we both were tempted on Fabio Cherant. Might end up making that a spot.
I know Morozov's the one favorite.
Morozov, thank you.
Yeah.
For some reason, I kept going back to Ronnie Lawrence, and no, we disagreed on that one. So, yeah, Morozov is the favorite that I'll be looking at maybe laying the hammer on here in this spot. Matt, it was a long-ass show, but this was a card that was more than worthy of it. I appreciate you taking the time to break the whole damn thing down with us, man. Floor is yours. If you want to shout anything out, let the people know what they can do, where they can find you.
No, always a pleasure, my friend. And I thought you said it well at the beginning that for us, like diehard MMA fans, this card is stacked. These fights make sense. The matchmaking is great. And for, after dealing with 3 months of top heavy cards, I am so pumped up for a card from top to bottom where I can't wait to watch every fight. And good luck, everybody. Like Clint, I'll be tweeting out my picks. Win, lose, or draw at the end of the night. You'll know how I did, and I can't wait. I'm going to have a lot of fun with this one.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, make sure you check out Matt Holt. Thank you again so much for taking the time with us here, Matt. We appreciate it. Everybody, good luck on all your degenerate action out there. I've got a reputation of crushing those little garbage dumpster diver type of cards, and I'm coming off of a nice win. I'm going to keep it tight this week on this card because, honestly, it seems pretty chalk heavy with a couple of bed shitters. So I'm going to tread very lightly on this card and hit the spots that I like hard rather than sprinkling 10 or 12 bets out there like I usually do. Words of wisdom, bankroll management, make sure you take care of that so that you can afford to take the shots when you see them. Stay safe, everybody. Let's go, Senators. The degenerate action is looking good. And thank you all so much for tuning in. Smash that like button on your way out. We'll catch you next time. Let's roll.